This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Abbot.
Good evening. In the past few minutes, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has published a video message to the people of Ukraine and Russia.
The scenes unfolding in the streets and fields of Ukraine are nothing short of a tragedy. Brave young soldiers and innocent civilians are being cut down. Tanks are rumbling through towns and cities, missiles raining indiscriminately from the skies. It's a generation or more since we witnessed such bloodshed in Europe. We hoped we would never have to see such sights again. The people of the United Kingdom stand with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters in the face of this unjustifiable assault on your homeland. We salute the fierce bravery and patriotism of your government, your military and your people. I'm in close contact with President Zelensky. And as Prime Minister, I speak for us all in the United Kingdom when I say once again, Slava Ukraini. This is a tragedy for Ukraine, and so too it is a tragedy for Russia. Like Ukraine, Russia is a great country with a rich history and a proud people. Like Ukraine, Russia's poets and artists and authors have shaped our culture, and Russia's soldiers fought so bravely with us in the struggle against fascism. But Putin's actions are leading to complete isolation for Russia, shunned by the rest of the international community, hit by immense economic sanctions, and facing a needless and bloody war that is already costing countless lives, from innocent Ukrainians to your Russian soldiers who will never see their families again. And to my Russian friends, я не верю, что эта война от вашего имени. This crisis, this tragedy, can and must come to an end. Тому що світу потрібна вільна та суверенна Україна. Slava Ukraini.
The Prime Minister's message to Ukraine translates as glory to Ukraine. Boris Johnson's message to Russia translates to I do not believe this war is in your name. Simon Marks joins us from Washington. Hello, Simon.
Evening, Nick.
So there's been some developments about sanctions, hasn't there?
Yes, there have. I mean, as you know, earlier in the day, the European Union and the UK indicated that they were going to sanction Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov personally and freeze their assets. And we all wondered whether the United States was going to follow suit. There were rumours that that was part of the plan. President Biden, of course, had been peppered with questions on Thursday at the White House about why he hadn't announced that he was personally targeting Vladimir Putin then. But a couple of hours ago now, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, confirmed that the United States is indeed following suit.
Following a telephone conversation President Biden held with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and in alignment with the decision by our European allies, the United States will join them in sanctioning President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov and members of the Russian National Security Team. I expect we'll have more specific details out later this afternoon.
Now, we haven't yet had more of those specific details, so we don't yet know what the American sanctions entirely involve. If they're like the European Union and UK ones, and my guess is that they will be, they won't be imposing any kind of travel ban. This is going to be largely focused on assets that they can identify, and we don't know how many of those they have identified, that are owned by Vladimir Putin and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Western financial institutions. I think of the two of them, it might be Sergei Lavrov who's more directly impacted by that, because I suspect there's quite a labyrinthine effort underway to understand exactly where Vladimir Putin's money might be, but it's possible that Sergei Lavrov is not quite as complex in that regard. But, you know, whether these are largely symbolic or not, they are certainly designed, according to the White House, to send a very clear message to the Kremlin that there is unity between the United States, its allies and partners in Europe, and NATO about their foursquare opposition to a Russian invasion that we know tonight has been intensifying, with bombardments continuing in Kiev, in Kharkiv, and in many of the other major population centres across Ukraine, with every indication that Vladimir Putin is absolutely determined to oust the government of President Volodymyr Zelensky. And take a listen to what President Zelensky said last night about his feeling that he and his people have, despite the sanctions and despite the assistance that was provided to Ukraine in the run-up to all of this, right now he's arguing that he and his country essentially has been abandoned by the West.
We are not afraid of anything. We are not afraid to defend our country. We are not afraid of Russia. We need to negotiate the end of this invasion, the end of this war. But now the fate of our country depends entirely on our army. We are left alone to defend our state. Who is ready to fight with us? Honestly, I see no one.
And there is no one. There's no cavalry that's about to ride over the horizon and help Ukrainian forces push back against the Russians. At the White House, Jen Psaki earlier on was asked whether President Zelensky hasn't got a point when he says he feels pretty abandoned by Western militaries.
Well, as you know, the president spoke with President Zelensky and made clear to him during that conversation that he commended his brave leadership, his brave actions, the brave actions of the Ukrainian people who are fighting to defend their country. He also conveyed our ongoing economic, humanitarian, and security support that we will continue to provide. So that is hardly standing on the sidelines. We are providing, again, the largest provider of security, economic, humanitarian assistance of any country in the world, and we will continue to support President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people.
So the White House doesn't think he's been left alone?
I think I'll leave it at that.
And that is where she left it, although later on she said that the United States is considering a range of options to provide additional assistance to Ukraine without going into any detail about what those options might be.
Is what Biden is doing receiving universal support in America, or is his actions still, is the reaction to what he does still divided on party lines?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely divided. I mean, it's divided on party lines in the sense that the Trump wing of the Republican Party is absolutely not going along with what Joe Biden is doing, and in many cases are expressing open sympathy and support for Russian President Vladimir Putin, which is an extraordinary position for anyone claiming to be a Republican to have arrived at. But we saw Steve Bannon, the former president's political Svengali, on his web-streamed TV show today, saying that Ukraine's a made-up country. It was never should never have been considered a sovereign state. I mean, absolutely echoing some of the arguments that Vladimir Putin made in his address to the Russian people earlier in the week. As you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week ourselves. President Trump at one point was faulted for saying that Vladimir Putin had been savvy. We heard some words over the last couple of days from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who described Vladimir Putin as, I don't have the precise quote, but he certainly expressed admiration for his tactical abilities while picking his words quite carefully there. Mike Pompeo, of course, one of the men who's thinking of running for the Republican Party's presidential nomination. And you can almost see when you sort of look into Mike Pompeo's eyes, a man who's struggling to figure out how he can come across as being tough on Russia and yet somewhat sympathetic to those Republicans out there who do not believe that President Biden should be doing very much, if anything, to help the Ukrainians, and absolutely should not be going to the mat for them. I mean, there are quote-unquote mainstream Republican voices, I mean, people we used to think of as being pretty far right, like Mitch McConnell, the Republicans' leader in the U.S. Senate, even Senator Lindsey Graham, a man who completely enabled Donald Trump throughout 4 years in the White House. But Lindsey Graham has been pleading with Republicans this week to honor the Republican Party's traditional orthodoxy of going head-to-head and toe-to-toe with the Russians. But we are a long way away from a Republican Party that was once represented by people like the late Senator John McCain, who's actually got a street in Kiev named after him because of the degree of support that he brought to the project of Ukrainian independence. Now, on the Democratic side, I think that there is absolutely support for President Biden. I mean, he was criticized by some on the left for his decision to deploy troops to Eastern Europe, but that was before the invasion, and with NATO indicating that it's going to shore up its eastern flank with additional troop numbers, and President Biden announcing the dispatch of more troops, some of those 8,500 troops that he'd placed on standby here to join NATO's rapid response force. He may have a bit of a sales job to do with the left of the party, but for the most part, people are lining up within the Democratic Party behind him.
It's incredible what you've just described, because the Republican Party used to, and probably still does try to, define itself by its patriotism and its traditional opposition to Russia, and now they appear to be have completely switched position and are now supporting Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, as opposed to the President of the United States of America.
Yeah, and that, of course, is stoked by America's right-wing media. I mean, if you turn on Fox News tonight in, 3 or 4 hours' time, Tucker Carlson will be back on the air spinning his argument that, America should absolutely not be going to the mat for Ukraine, that America should be focused on providing security at its southern borders, not worrying about what Russian forces might be doing as they continue to pierce the Ukrainian border. As you and I have discussed before, a couple of weeks ago in an interview with the New York Times, Mr. Carlson was actually asked if he's a paid Kremlin agent and denied it. But you hear voices of sympathy towards Russia coming from other prominent figures, both on television and online as well. Former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn has expressed absolutely no sympathy for what Ukraine is going through, and he remains an influential figure on the what we used to consider the fringe of the Republican Party, that fringe, of course, having been mainstreamed by former President Donald Trump. And this is going to pose a real problem for anyone who wants to become the Republican Party's presidential nominee in 2024, whether that is Donald Trump or someone else. I mean, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who's been speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference this week in Orlando. So has Mike Pompeo, former Vice President Mike Pence, who's been communicating a very tough stance towards Vladimir Putin, a much more orthodox Republican stance towards Vladimir Putin. But it's going to be problematic for Republicans. I mean, I think we should also put this into some historical context, though, Nick. It's not just Republicans who, on occasion, have underplayed the threat that Vladimir Putin poses to the United States. I mean, he never expressed sympathy for Vladimir Putin, but you will remember former President Barack Obama in a presidential debate ridiculing Mitt Romney, who was then the Republican Party's presidential candidate, for suggesting that Russia was America's primary national security challenge. There was a debate in which Obama turned to Romney and said, "Senator Romney, the 1980s have called, they want their foreign policy back." So there are all sorts of people that have misplayed this over the years, but certainly that extraordinary turn in the Republican Party's grassroots view of Russia is absolutely extraordinary to behold.
And what was just finally, what was extraordinary was the words of the Deputy Press Secretary talking about Donald Trump's admiration for Vladimir Putin. He's a chap, the Deputy Press Secretary, who usually speaks, quite cautiously, very circumspect in what they say. He called Donald Trump a nauseating, fearful pig. So the gloves are off.
Yeah, the gloves are off. They get irritated at the White House when they get asked questions about Donald Trump, and they do come up because reporters like myself are absolutely awash with Trump statements every single day in our email box. I can't tell you how many statements and fundraising emails we all now receive on a daily basis. It's at least a dozen a day. But the reality is that Donald Trump, whether the White House likes it or not, is the dominant figure on the Republican side of the aisle in the United States today. He might not be this time next year. He might not be by the time the presidential election rolls around. But right now, he's set himself up as the first kind of leader of the opposition in a country that doesn't formally have one.
Last time we talked, just finally, I probably said just finally already.
It's all right.
But it just occurred to me because of what you just said. Last time we talked, there was going to be this CPAC meeting, this sort of conservative get-together in Florida, and there was going to be a straw poll as to which was their preferred candidate. It was DeSantis or Trump. Has that poll happened yet?
I don't think that straw poll has yet happened. No, it's happening this weekend.
Right.
So they started meeting, I think, yesterday, and I suspect the straw poll's happening either Saturday or Sunday before the gathering closes. But no doubt, when you and I have our natter at midnight, Sunday night, Monday morning, we might have a result by then.
Very good. Talk to you then. Thanks, Simon. Simon Marks reporting live from Washington. After the break, your calls, texts and tweets. What does the West need to do now? Have we done remotely enough? Is what you've done already going to make the slightest bit of difference? 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
This is LBC with Nick Abbott. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
0345 6060 973. We are talking about what action has been taken by the West so far, and specifically by this country, whether you think it's remotely enough, whether we are somewhat holding back, and if so, what you might think the reason for that might be. What can we do to stop Vladimir Putin from continuing and going further? 0345 6060 973. Manchester. Hello, Dan.
Hi,
Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm 31 years old, and I don't think I've ever really been as ashamed of my country as I am today. I think that the consistent cuts in defence budgets shows to me there's an integration within the Russian politics as well that has allowed corruption within our political system. I think that us standing silent, the FTSE rising and gaining back from what it fell yesterday, today shows that the sanctions are irrelevant. And I think that reality is the West is doing nothing. And like I've just heard you then mentioning about the Republicans in America saying how they are almost siding with Putin, it's shameful.
Yeah, that is absolutely extraordinary what's happening in America. It's not happening as overtly in this country, but of course there is this issue that won't go away about the Conservative Party being overly keen, let's put it like that, on accepting money from Russian sources.
100%. I think if we knew what everything that went on, we would, well, the Tories wouldn't be in power. I voted for them, and I hand on heart, I'm ashamed to say now that I've done that. I think that we're not supporting Ukraine enough. The West, NATO, has proven itself that Russia can walk into the Balkan states and will do nothing. And we pay $60 billion a year for armed forces that are just sat there useless at the minute because our politicians, for some reason that we are not privy to, don't dare step foot in Ukraine. Why can we not put our soldiers in Ukraine? I don't understand.
Well, I think the thinking is that it would cause a war between us and Russia, which is not what we actually want. If we can possibly avoid it and stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks, then that would be a good thing to do without the exchange of gunfire.
I think putting troops in western Ukraine and informing Russia that this is the line that you do not cross. If so, there will be put it back in Russia's hands that they will cause the war. I think Russia is certainly scared of the West because it should be. It's much bigger economically and militarily as well. Believe it or not, the UK has a bigger economy than Russia itself. So the EU pandering to Russia because of gas pipelines and oligarchs, billions in their cities is stupidity. So I think politicians need to remember that, the 67 million people in this country, that 99% of them do not benefit from Russian oligarchs, and they need to make quick decisions because Ukraine could fall by Monday, and this slow response is going to aid that.
All right, good to talk to you. Thanks, Dan. It does seem rather slow. It does seem, I'm no expert on international finance or any other subject for that matter, but it does seem as though we've given an enormous amount of notice to people to move their money around, which I'm sure is as easy as pressing a button on their phone, to places in which we won't be able to, to get our hands on it. These sanctions, what do they actually mean? I mean, if you go to if you tell somebody you can't get the contents of a cupboard, but we're only going to lock the cupboard tomorrow, then there's not going to be anything in there by the time you lock it. It's almost as though it's been designed not to inconvenience them, to put it mildly. 0345 6060 973. Jim texts, I wonder if Putin is inadvertently a victim of his own propaganda. An intelligent person reading the same newspaper every year for 30 years may well become a racist, a homophobe, or indeed believe his or her next door neighbour is a Nazi. Like when using the internet, being selective as to what news to choose, accept and or digest. I used to think that people in this country who voted for Brexit were all stupid. I do not believe this now to be true. Watching Putin's inane rant on the TV, he seemed, to me at least, to believe every word he was saying. Perhaps. Yeah. And if so, I don't know whether that's more alarming than whether he was just acting. 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Email nick@lbc.co.uk. If you're on Twitter, it's @LBC. Coming up, as Russian troops advance towards Kiev, we'll cross live to a journalist in the Ukrainian capital. That's after the LBC News headlines with Zora Suleiman.
Nick Abbott on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
We are trying to get through to our guest in Kiev, which is not the easiest thing, as you can imagine. While we're trying to do that, let's talk to some of the callers that are waiting to speak to me. 0345 6060 973. Southall. Hello, Manesh.
Oh, hello, Nick. Good evening. How are you?
Manesh, good, thanks.
Yeah. I'm just deeply saddened by all this and our activities. And unfortunately, sanctions, which have been pre-advised, will not work because, number one, it takes too long. And number two, we've already told our opponent what we're doing, when we're doing it. So Putin, unfortunately, is 3 steps ahead of us. He's already pre-factored all these sanctions in place. So he's aware of what's happening, and he's still going ahead. So therefore, this is not the action that we should continue onwards. And my belief is, we should, if we want to beat Putin, we've got to think like a Putin, think like a Russian, act like a Russian, and perhaps it means involving cyber wars ourselves and infiltrating his internet and having some kind of technological advantage over him. But more importantly, what's the biggest fear he's got? We can't handle this because he's got a nuclear warhead. How did he get it? How did we allow him to get it? How did we allow him to infiltrate our money system around the world? And laughing at Boris having parties, and this is a joke. And my belief, the solution is the only solution that's going to work is his own people working against him. So perhaps he should have another coup, which we can encourage in his country, and we can teach his people where their money has gone. That, I believe, is the only way. I can't see any other angle out of this situation apart from declaring war against Russia. What's your feelings on that, Nick?
Well, people have various notions as to what it is that Vladimir Putin wants and what he is most fearful of. And people have said, well, it's his money. I mean, he is reportedly, by many accounts, the richest man in the world. But he finds it difficult to spend it, certainly abroad. I mean, he can spend no end of cash in Russia, but that doesn't speak of the sort of world-spanning international figure that he aspires to be. And his hold on his money is dependent on his maintaining power because it's not held in his own name. It's the oligarchs who have spread it around the world, and particularly in London, apparently. But it's so he must have so much money that it can't be a money thing. That's not what is motivating him. And it's perhaps the reunification of the USSR so that he can be the emperor of an empire. I mean, maybe it's just this sort of notion of grandiosity that drives him. It's hard to believe that he's actually frightened of an invasion by NATO, because that's not really what NATO does. So the world is scratching its head as to what is the end game here. What is it that he really wants? What's driving him? Assuming that he's not just completely insane.
No, I think we've passed that. It's not about his notion of what his intentions are or how psychologically prophetic he is. We've got to move beyond that. We've reached a stage where he's making actions where we have to now take different actions to stop him.
But if you don't know what his aim is, then you can't stop him from achieving it. So it's very important that you figure out what is driving him so that you can, switch his engine off, so to speak.
Well, this is it. I think we've got to outsmart him, and the only way we can outsmart him is sanctions he's expecting. So if you're playing a game of chess and you've already told someone, your opponent, your next three moves, you're not going to win that game.
No, you're not. No. All right, thanks, Manesh. 0345 6060 973. Let's see. Joe texts, Johnson is loving his Churchill moment. Well, he's been waiting for it for a good long while, and I would imagine he is, in some small way, rather delighted that this has taken our mind off his various travails. Nobody's talking about Partygate anymore. Gaz tweets, President Zelensky is right. They are standing alone tonight under the full force of a Russian invasion. I feel powerless. We should be by their side right now. Your thoughts, please. 0345 6060 973. Let's have Pinner. Anil.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Abbott. I think it's all words, as Shakespeare said. And it was always words. If Putin is Antichrist, then the attitudes of the people who run the establishment in the United Kingdom and the United States the establishments were aware that Ukraine was never going to be part of NATO. It never, ever was going to be. Russia requires a warm water port. You have to recognize the essential difficulty in which Putin finds himself. He has no warm water outlets in the Mediterranean. Everything but everything. The northern end of Russia, the Mediterranean end of Russia, is heavily guarded against, and he is totally out of action. And I cannot see Russia, who has to defend the interest, Putin, who has to defend the interests of Russia, because he's not that much of a riddle. For 20 years, he's been trying to say, look, deal with me. They refuse to deal with him. And now they come to an impasse. People have died, and they're still telling him, look, we'll do something for you, such as what? do sanctions, personalized sanctions, how do they really count? Does Putin going to come out of Russia? And all right, you've got the foreign minister, you prevent him coming in, you'll send in a second. What does it really matter? I mean, please, for God's sake, you've got to bring Russia into the fold.
What does that mean, into the fold?
What I am trying to say is that Russia is European, but it is also Asian. And bring it in, just as you have to bring China in.
But what does bringing it in mean?
What it means is, please talk to the guy, please bring him in. You want to impose sanctions on him, you want to prevent him getting money. You really want to supply oil. The Americans really want to supply oil to Europe. They want Germany to change their oil supplier.
You think that this is about America wanting to sell Germany its oil?
That's it. I think it is very much that, because they basically want to deprive Russia of financial means.
Right, so how has America made Russia invade Ukraine?
No, it hasn't made Russia invade Ukraine, but Putin has been under threat for 20 years, and he has come to the conclusion that the opposite side is never going to talk sensibly.
But talk sensibly. I think what you're saying is that we should just allow him to take over a sovereign country.
Okay. Could I then interrupt what you're saying?
In order to get his hands on a warm water port.
Very important to him.
Well, yeah, no doubt. But if we thought, oh, you know what, Calais looks nice, can we just take that too?
No, it's not as simple as that. It isn't as simple as that. He is the head of a country, which is the largest country in the world. He has to protect that country and its operations.
But protect it from what, though?
Protect it from being surrounded. In the history, how many times since 1605, over 500 years, every 30 years, Russia has fought a war with people coming in from the Urals. Poland began it, Napoleon, Hitler, Crimea. I mean, let's put a stop to it, for God's sake. Even Marx is not dead. You may not like his philosophy, and it isn't being practiced, but incorporate them into the system, incorporate Latin. I'm sorry, I'm going outside my topic. I won't take your time.
But I don't see how we haven't incorporated Russia into the system. I mean, all countries in the world, particularly the large ones, are financially woven together, as we're about to find out to our cost, because sanctions against Russia are going to hurt us too. We haven't denied them access to the modern world, and neither have we surrounded them. If a country wants to join NATO, then it should be allowed to do it. You know, I've heard this argument so many times from people who voted Brexit because they wanted to decide which international organisation they were a part of. And that was our right, apparently, but it apparently is not the right of Ukraine, whose existence people question. Is it even a real country, they say? What does it matter what the people of Ukraine do or do not want? Let's decide their future on the basis of what a dictator from another country wants. I can't see the sense in that. But thanks, Anil. 0345 6060 973.
LBC.
Good evening and welcome. This is Andrew Marr.
Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
I was looking for a place where I could speak frankly. That's LBC. I was looking for somewhere that is fast-moving, exciting, fresh. That's LBC.
Tonight with Andrew Marr.
This is a new kind of show. I want to call things out. If someone is lying, I want to say that they're lying.
Starts Monday the 7th of March.
6 p.m. is more or less the perfect time. LBC is now the only place to go.
Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Starts Monday the 7th of March from 6 p.m. Listen on your radio and watch on Global Player.
LBC.
Introducing the new electric tool your business needs. Heavy duty and industry approved, it cuts through the toughest tasks like butter. 80% charged in just 32 minutes. Experience up to 205 miles worth of extraordinary power on a full charge. effortlessly carrying 1.2 tons. It's emission-free, so you can explore the low-emission zones freely. This isn't what you think it is. It's much, much more. This is the all-new Toyota ProAce electric van. Range and charging figures are for comparability purposes. Charging based on optimal conditions. Range based on WLTP test conditions. Terms and conditions apply. Search ProAce Electric.
Philip Schofield here. Thinking about part exchanging your car? You could be barking up the wrong tree. Why not check out We Buy Any Car? Buying without part exchanging could get you a bigger discount on your next car. That's barking up the right tree. To find out how much your car's worth in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
Admin fee may apply. For more information, see WeBuyAnyCar.com/info.
I didn't get vaccinated. I did get really ill. I did 3 days in bed and then about a week on the sofa. I didn't taste a thing for about a month. I still don't do stairs if I can help it. I didn't think it would be this bad.
If you're unvaccinated, you're much more likely to be hospitalised with COVID-19 than if you've had both doses of the vaccine and the booster. Get vaccinated now at nhs.uk/COVID vaccination.
Imagine you in a nice comfy seat, with your hands behind your head, taking in the views, instead of taking on the road, maybe even taking a nap. That's the bliss of getting where you need to go without worrying about driving. Book your train journey via avantiwestcoast.co.uk and we'll take you there. Avanti West Coast. Feel good travel.
Whether you're searching for record players or pianos, how you pay matters. Visa helps protect you from payment fraud online. Visa, a network working for everyone.
I'm working from home, so I want to look the business. On screen, people only see your face, so decent glasses are a must. I've got this titanium pair for serious meetings, and these retro ones for looking all creative. It's great that Specsavers do 2 for 1 from £69. I look very professional. What people don't know is I'm just wearing boxer shorts.
2 for 1 single vision glasses to your prescription from £69 at Specsavers. You know you should.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with Nick Abbott.
0345 6060 973. The mayor of Kiev says it is a difficult and dangerous night. Let's go to there and talk to a conflict journalist reporting from Kiev. It's Oz Chatterjee. Hello, Oz.
Hello.
So what's been happening?
The last few hours have been pretty difficult here in central Kiev. There have been several air raid sirens have gone off. We've heard what sounds like artillery volleys. It's unclear whether they're incoming or outgoing. They're just loud rumbling booms that I haven't been able to locate exactly where in the city they're coming from, but they have been inching closer to the center of Kiev. I was out and about earlier. The streets are dead. Families are packed into these underground stations where they're using them as bomb shelters. It has huge shades of World War II, to be honest with you, the whole experience.
Are people abandoning the city or are they staying in some numbers?
I mean, a lot of people tried to abandon the city when they got the opportunity to, but my experience is a lot of people are taking arms and going out onto the streets to defend their country. They've been given arms by the Ministry of Defense, and you know, there are the only queues I've seen in this city are not people panic buying or hoarding. They're stocking up on weapons and rifles and ammunition.
We've heard reports of people actually coming in the opposite direction from other countries and other parts of Ukraine in order to defend the capital.
I mean, I can't confirm that because I haven't seen it, but given what I have learned and what Ukrainian people have told taught me and told me over the last week or so is that they're prepared to fight for this city to the last man.
Are the television stations and the radio stations still working?
Yeah, internet's still running, power's still running. Things are still up as it stands. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not watching much Ukrainian TV out here, but life in the capital is dead. There's no shops open. There's no people on the streets. But there very much is a sense that the city is resisting what's happening to it.
And is the president's message getting through?
I mean, again, I look, the issue is I've only been here just over a week, right? So my experience talking to people was that they weren't Zelensky's biggest fan necessarily going into this. But a lot of people are, rising to the occasion, as it were. And one of the sentiments that I've heard a lot is, he's not the person I want for president, but I will fight for him. He's my president. It's a sort of weird kind of, I don't have to like the man, but I will die for my right to vote for him as my democratic leader is kind of the impression that I'm getting from a lot of people. And Zelensky's words, his actions, his speeches in the last 72 hours have been, from an outsider's perspective, brave, humbling, defiant, inspiring. It's difficult to imagine what you would do in his position. Any human being would do in his position. The Russians want to kill him. This is clear. The signals intelligence has told us this. President Biden has told us this. Zelensky, speaking to his allies in the West, said this may be the last time you hear me alive tonight. So I think whatever political differences you may have with a man like Volodymyr Zelensky, he has shown his caliber as a human being in these last 72 hours.
How has the actions of NATO countries, outside countries, gone down in Ukraine? What are the locals saying about the help or lack of it that they're getting?
I'll be honest, that there've been some. Speaking as an ardent Remainer, this is it's interesting to come away with this perspective, but there's been a lot of criticism of the EU, of Germany, of France even, but a lot of praise for the United Kingdom. I mean, maybe it's because I'm British, so when people talk to me, they obviously want to talk to me about Britain's role in this. But of all the countries, this is interesting for our domestic. Of all the countries, people they make a special point of pointing out Britain's solidarity with Ukraine has been unshakable, and I think it's worth mentioning that while we might not be here out in the streets helping defend Ukrainian people, we have sent them significant support, military, hardware, diplomatic support, hopefully operational and logistical support. It's in Ukrainians' hands now, and it's in the hands of the capitals of Western countries to decide just how far they're willing to go to defend Ukrainian liberal democracy.
It is interesting that Boris Johnson, I mean, I have read that the Ukrainians seem to be somewhat in love with Boris Johnson. He's more popular there than he is here.
I think that when you are a nation under threat and you have someone unequivocally standing shoulder to shoulder with them. Now, for whatever reasons that may be, look, it should be no surprise to people that I'm not Boris Johnson's biggest fan. So I wouldn't praise him for for anything unless I absolutely believed that he had done the right thing, and Ukrainian people are telling me that he's doing the right thing, so I have to listen. I have to listen to them, but the response from the opposition parties, Labour, has been impressive. The SNP, they've all shown solidarity with the Ukrainian government, and it's a time for, during something as huge as this, as era defining as this will be the war that our children and grandchildren remember, in the same way that Iraq was 20 years ago. But this is bigger, much bigger than Iraq, if you ask me. Much bigger. Iraq wasn't a liberal democracy. This wasn't this naked war of aggression that Russia has launched against Ukraine because it believes that Ukrainians don't have the right to sovereignty or independence or democracy. This is an era-defining moment, and it's time for partisan differences to be put aside. And I think that the British Parliament has been doing an incredible job of that, because right now what matters is the Ukrainian people.
Can I just ask you about the justifications that Vladimir Putin has been putting forward, and what your experience is of your time there? I mean, he says, the phrase that jumps out at you is that the mission in Ukraine is to denazify Ukraine. What do you know about that?
I mean, Putin's an expert in Nazis and neo-Nazis because he's been funding them around the world for many, many years now. Outright white supremacists are Vladimir Putin's favorite people. Vladimir Putin is a fascist. Ideologically, he is a fascist. There is no disputing that he is a hard right, ultra-nationalist totalitarian. He is a fascist through and through. So whatever excuses he wants to, whatever significant problems Ukraine has with the far right, which it does, it doesn't have any far-right members of parliament. None of them won seats in the last Liberal Democratic election, which Ukraine has, which Russia does not. Nobody should believe that. They're just outright lies. And to call the Jewish president of Ukraine a Nazi it takes some audacity from a fascist, from a tyrant as heinous and horrific as Vladimir Putin is. It really is. It's sort of insulting to even have that pathetic, fabricated pretext used as a justification for his naked war of aggression against the Ukrainian people.
Just on a personal note, Oz, what are your plans? Are you staying?
I'm staying in Ukraine. I'm staying in Kiev. There are 3 million people in this city. There are 3 million people here. So I will stay with them.
Well, it was good to talk to you, and I hope that you can spare the time to talk to us on LBC in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's Oz Chatterjee, a conflict journalist reporting from Kiev. Coming up after the news, Boris Johnson says nothing is off the table when it comes to supporting citizens in Ukraine. I'm going to be talking to a former military officer, Frank Ledwidge, to discuss what needs to happen next. And of course, your texts, tweets and calls. Should we be putting NATO boots on the ground? 0345 6060 973 LBC.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Abbot.
It's 4 minutes past 11. You're listening to Nick Abbot on LBC. Boris Johnson has said that nothing is off the table concerning the reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's talk to Frank Ledwidge about that. He is a barrister, former military officer who has served in the Balkans, Iraq and Afghanistan, and author of the books Losing Small Wars and Investment in Blood. Hello, Frank.
Hey there, Nick.
When Boris Johnson says nothing is off the table, he doesn't actually mean that, does he? Because has he not already ruled out putting British troops in the area?
I'm not sure he's ruled it out that explicitly, but certainly implicitly, and I'd be very surprised if we were going to see line British soldiers, which is to say battalions, companies and formations like that on the ground in Ukraine. We'll certainly see them, and we are seeing them very visibly and purposely visibly in the Baltics. At least one of my friends is heading off there very soon, in Poland and throughout the NATO area in the Air Force and Navy. The question is, which we'll never hear the answer to probably in our lifetime, the degree to which certain special forces units, perhaps some of whom might be on leave at the moment, may be involved. I doubt it myself, but somehow the means will have to be developed to get weaponry to Ukrainian insurgents, and that traditionally is done through those kind of soldiers. We're not there yet. We may never get there, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that was being envisaged.
Now, you say that British troops are in the Baltic area. What are they doing there, and how many of them are there?
Well, at the moment, there are about, it's difficult to say, there'll probably be about 1,000. There'll be a battle group's worth. There will be other troops throughout. I think there's a naval task group now heading towards Norway. HMS Diamond left today from Portsmouth. That's a scheduled exercise, but I suspect it will be a very operationally focused exercise, even more than usual. The NATO reaction force has been alerted today for the first time ever onto operations. That will include at least a squadron, I should think, of our strike and fighter aircraft to be dedicated to NATO work. We've already got fighter aircraft over Poland these days. That's fairly open source stuff. And that's where we are. In other words, Britain is crucially helping to strengthen the backbone of NATO in the Baltic areas alongside many of our allies.
Right, so it's a fully armed group of troops, but they're not there for training purposes, is what I'm sort of getting at.
No, they're not there for training purposes now. They're there for deterrent purposes. And we have had battle groups worth of British soldiers in the Baltic states for the last since 2015. They have been there to act essentially as a tripwire, as a deterrent tripwire. Now what's happening is it's realised that tripwires aren't going to do, and there needs to be deterrence. There needs full panoply defensive arrangements set up to ensure that should Putin decide to move on from Ukraine, which is by no means impossible, many people think, then he's going to meet an extremely robust response under NATO auspices, which will, in due course, conventionally at least defeat him.
What about the approach of other countries? I mean, are we alone over there, or is the rest of is the EU countries joining in? What about America?
Oh, no, we're by no means alone. All of the major NATO countries are alongside us. The main rapid reaction force of NATO is led by France. There's a French regiment and German regiment. There are Polish and Portuguese elements in that. The Polish army, which is very formidable, is already on high alert. And the US has sent about 15,000 troops already into Eastern Europe. So we're part of a much bigger effort.
I mean, what you're describing sounds like NATO forces, working with one sort of thought in mind, which is not necessarily how it has been with NATO in a recent history, is it?
No, Afghanistan didn't help. I think we lost a lot of morale there. We've spent much of the last 20 years on what I and many others I think regard as displacement activities as irrelevant conflicts in peripheral areas when we should have been focusing on the real threat, which was Russia. Anyway, we're past that now, and I think NATO is focusing on the key threat to Europe and our way of life, which is the Russian Federation and its leader, and of course further afield, the People's Republic of China and its Communist Party.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Vladimir Putin puts forward is that he was concerned about NATO creeping towards his borders. Is it perhaps ironical that what his action has done is to strengthen NATO.
Yeah, it is ironical, and certainly that's the last thing that he would have wanted. Although I suspect it's baked into what's happening now. In other words, I think it's fairly obvious that it was something he would have expected, and politically speaking, I don't think this is something that. I mean, in the best case scenario for Putin, of course, he might have been able to drive some wedges between, states like Hungary and Poland and the rest of the West, as it were, but that hasn't happened.
Can you give us an idea of the nature of the Russian troops? I mean, are these just teenagers who have been put into uniform, or are they battle-hardened people? What's the nature of his forces?
Right, there are two kinds of regular or Russian army forces. The first kind are called contracted soldiers. They tend to be the NCO cadre. There are about 40% of the force are contracted soldiers. They're professionals. They're the ones you're going to see in the airborne units, in the special units, some of the more capable infantry units. The rest of the force are essentially conscripts. Those are the ones that we're seeing captured. Those are the ones we're seeing interrogated. They will surrender, obviously for very good reason. I often don't know why they're there, fairly quickly. So you've got about a 40-60% mix of professional soldiers and conscripts in the Russian army, although it might be edging towards 50% these days. Those figures are a couple of years old. Yeah, that's pretty much how it is for them. And in terms, if I'm just one other thing, in terms of their combat experience, you're going to have a fairly large group which will have experience in Syria and perhaps Africa, but most of them will have no battle experience at all.
And is that not the opposite of the troops that they're going to be facing in Ukraine, who are battle hardened?
The Ukrainians will post and rotate units to the Donbass area and have done for the last 6 or 7 years, and many of them will have combat experience there, or at least experience in a fairly low intensity conflict, the kind of thing that perhaps we might have done in Afghanistan. None of them will have high intensity combat experience, I suspect, within the last 2 or 3 years, although there will be some who had it in 2014, 2015. But most Ukrainian soldiers will be new to the fight, as it were, I would suspect.
Did you read reports that some of the Russian troops laid down their weapons when they realised what their mission actually was? They thought, oh, we're fighting Ukrainians. Well, these are our brothers and sisters. Did you read that?
Yes, I think that there are plenty. They're not new in being soldiers that don't really know what they're fighting for. I very much suspect as well they were told, or their propaganda will have told them that they would have been welcomed. And I don't know if your listeners have seen some of the remarkable little acts taking place of courage from Ukrainian citizens approaching Russian soldiers and saying things like, "I'm going to give you some sunflowers so that some seeds so that sunflowers can grow when you leave your body here on the land of Ukraine." And that may come as a surprise, that attitude to some of the younger troops. But I suspect for those Russian soldiers or servicemen who've worked in places like Syria, they'll fully understand what the situation is, and it won't bother them, that kind of thing.
With the nature of the troops that you've described on either side of the borders, in the confusion of all this, is there the potential that somebody on either side doing something that was either by mistake or they just decided to shoot somebody that they didn't like? Can we, by that method, stumble into a much bigger war than the one that we're looking at?
Yes, very much so. And the scenarios are endless of that. You might have, for example, a Ukrainian aircraft being chased by a Russian one. You could have missiles going astray from the Black Sea, the Russian Black Sea Fleet. You could have skirmishes that cross the border and with Russian elements engaged by, say, Polish forces. Should the fight get that far, I don't think it would. Yeah, there are all kinds of scenarios which could present a real danger, but that was the case also in places like Syria. And what was done there was that you would have the command structures of the Allied side and the Russians talking every day. It isn't particularly well known, and it's not secret, that conferences take place between American commanders and Russian commanders in Syria, saying we're going to be doing this today and we don't need to be encountering your guys, and vice versa, to avoid that kind of thing. It's my understanding that from open sources and reading the press, that kind of arrangement isn't quite as formalized as it was in Syria, where both Americans and Russians were operating, but that it's likely to be present on a fairly informal basis to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen.
Now, the title of one of your books is Losing Small Wars. Does what we're looking at here, does it count as a small war? Excuse me, no, a small war?
This is not a small war. The reference there was Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq, which are traditional sort of colonial counterinsurgencies, really, although on a fairly large scale. Now, this is a major conflict, and in my view, it's the start of a much longer and perhaps even higher intensity conflict between Russia and the West. I don't think this is going to finish when or if Kiev is subdued or forced to surrender.
And can you see the scenario in which Vladimir Putin can lose?
I would be struggling to see a scenario where, politically speaking, he could win. I don't think he or his advisors have spooled out the political strategic consequences of all this in the medium term. I think in the long term, this is going to be a major strategic defeat for Russia, in that they have lost any legitimacy. It'll be interesting to see tonight whether China votes with them in the Security Council. If they don't vote with them, if they abstain, that will be a major defeat, I think, for Putin, as he will see the world truly on all sides turning against him. I don't think that will happen. But to answer your question directly, I can't see a pathway to anything that looks like anything other than a temporary tactical victory in Ukraine for Putin. I think there'll be an insurgency and a drip feed of blood, sadly, of Russian soldiers' blood and of civilians and resistance fighters' blood now for several years, perhaps, or several months, and perhaps even years to come. And no way could that be counted anything other than a strategic defeat.
Frank Ledwidge, a barrister, former military officer who has served in the Balkans, Iraq and Afghanistan, and author of the books Losing Small Wars and Investment in Blood. After the break, I will return to your calls, texts and tweets. Tell me what the West needs to do next in Ukraine. 0345 6060 973 LBC.
This is LBC with Nick Abbott. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
And Frank Ledwidge was talking there about the UN resolution, the UN Security Council voting on the resolution condemning Russia, and he said that if China abstained, then it would be a significant result, and that's exactly what's happened. China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained from condemning Russia. Russia, of course, did not, and they have veto, and so that resolution does not go forward. But that's a predictable result. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. Email nicka@lbc.co.uk. And if you're on Twitter, it's at LBC. Woodford Green, Liboff.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
It's not really Woodford, it's Woodford Green.
Okay. What would you like to say?
Well, I am a Ukrainian which was born and grew up in Soviet Union until I was 42. And I came in UK in 2002 just because it was at the time kind of still pro-Russian not regime, but it was after Soviet Union collapsed. We still have a lot of corruption, and I just came here for thinking for 2 years, and I realized how good, really nice human life here.
Yeah.
In 2002, and I stay still since then. I wasn't qualified in Ukraine midwife, and I tried to to step in UK as working as a midwife as well. So I'm working as a healthcare assistant, and I'm working with many different kind of people, old people who experience war, and they are really terrifying what's happening now in Ukraine. When I'm hearing that I'm from Ukraine.
So you were born in Ukraine, but you grew up in Ukraine. You grew up in Russia. So where do your sympathies lie?
It wasn't Russia. It was Soviet Union.
Right.
Yeah, and Soviet Union contained 15 different countries, including Ukraine.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. So
Belarus.
Right. Okay. I got you.
Yeah. So, and but yeah, I was brought up as part of Soviet Union. And only when I came to UK in 2002, 2 years later, I realized that all history which I was taught in that country, in Soviet Union, was completely wrong. And that's what I'm trying to say about propaganda and everything. What British people and European people and people in the world hearing from, it's absolutely disaster for brain. And this affecting now all population in all world. The Putin and that kind of part of world. I don't want really name Russia, because Russian people are very, very friendly, very nice people. I always name them like Kremlin, because this is part of only group of people who really ruling that world so badly.
Right. Okay. So we can't conflate what comes out of the Kremlin with the ideas and the thoughts and the actions of Russian people in general. Do you get the feeling then that the Russian people are for or against what Vladimir Putin is doing?
I would say now about 75% of population in Russia would be against of what he's doing if they would know exactly what's happening.
Do you think it comes down? Sorry to interrupt, but do you think it comes down to age? Is it that the older you are in Russia?
Yes, definitely. Yes,
right.
Yes. That was my point, because my daughter is working in IT, and she has to work with people around the world, and she's working with youngest people in Russia, and that's what she's saying. That most people in Russia, they cannot understand what's happening because they knew Ukraine is independent country.
Right. So so to be clear, the older you are in Russia, the more likely you are to support Vladimir Putin's actions.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. Because they've been grow up in that kind of era. They. And I understand them very well because I've been grow up the same, you know.
I suppose it's also. Sorry to interrupt, but I suppose it's also the fact that the older you are, the less likely you are to be internet savvy, and so the information that you will be getting will be from the state itself on television and radio.
Yes. So they're not updating; they absolutely stuck on television, and that's why. And this is kind of Russia heading towards a really big breakdown between the generation, because obviously all the generation is dying, they're getting sick, they're dying, and younger generation, they're growing up, they're getting more knowledge, and they are stronger. So Putin knows that this comes to the point that he has to now or never.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Lyubov. That's a very interesting take on it. It's there's some reflection on our own experience. There seems to be a bit of a war between the ages here as well. If you take the pensioner vote out of the equation, then A, we would have not left the European Union, and B, Jeremy Corbyn would have been our Prime Minister. The difference in opinion is really stark, above and below about 60 years old, both here and apparently in Russia. 0345 6060 973. Let's have Heathrow. Hello, Matthew.
Oh, hi, Nick. What it is, I believe that, the whole world should carry on working on isolating Russia, but we shouldn't put United Nations, the NATO troops on the ground. But what the UN's got to do is they've got to actually broker a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. It's pointless, all these lives being lost. We know Russia ultimately will win, and it's just it's pointless to carry on the fighting. So, then once they broker a ceasefire, then the UN could get peacekeeping troops to go there, and even if Russia, they'll be part of then the peacekeeping troops, and they could bring back sort of anyone what wants to leave Ukraine back to Russia. But we can't get into a world war about it.
But that presupposes that Vladimir Putin is interested in a ceasefire.
Well, that's what we've got to try, and the only thing we've got to do is just make sure the whole world carries on just isolating them. We shouldn't be... we've banned Aeroflot from flying to the UK, but, no countries should now be flying to Russia. Just only a few essential flights just to let people move back where they want to go. And, they've got to be just closed off from the rest of the world. And ultimately, he's going to have to find a way out. And his way out will be to just be part of the peacekeeping. They've got their shock soldiers there already. Everyone just stops fighting. The longer it goes on, the more people will die. It's going to be more difficult for everyone to get around the table and resolve it. And it's got to be resolved. The war doesn't work.
Yes, but there is only one person that might stand in the way of that, and he is, of course, the person that started this in the first place. It would be good if we could indeed stop the aggression and talk around a table, but we'd have to persuade Vladimir Putin that would be in his interests, and whether that's possible or not, well, we'll find out, I suppose. Thank you, Matthew. 0345 6060 973. Still to come tonight, more of your thoughts on the situation in Ukraine. What does the UK need to do next? That's after the LBC News headlines at 11:30 with Zora Sullivan.
This is LBC with Nick Abbott.
0345 6060 973. Archie texts, Putin will drag this out till April, and then China will take Taiwan, and then the West is in a difficult situation. Al texts, when the USA starts having problems with China, will it want Europe to support it? Allies work both ways. Given the USA's weird recent behaviours, I think Europe should be less dependent on the USA militarily. Weird recent behaviours. Are you talking about Donald Trump? Is that the weirdness that you are referring to? And Roger texts, Republicans supporting Putin is like some lefties here having so much hatred for Boris that they support Putin over anything that Boris does. Well, it's interesting that the lefties and the righties both seem to be in favour of Vladimir Putin. The hard left and the very right wing seem to like Vladimir Putin a lot. It's the majority in the middle that aren't so keen. Wolverhampton, hello, Jake.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Very good. I think we need to really, really look at the picture of the two people that matter here. And I think, personally, the two people that matter here are Vladimir Putin himself and the man that he sees when he looks in the mirror. I think since his premiership in sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, I think on his watch, a hell of a lot has happened that has almost sort of made Russia a far less of a power than what it was. And I think he almost hates himself for that. I think he's in a position where he's seen the breakup of the Soviet Union, he's seen EU get stronger, he's seen NATO get stronger, and he's seen that the sort of democratic influence from the West has increased. And I think he's now at an age at 69 where he may feel like he's coming to the end himself in terms of the sort of power overthrow in Russia and the younger generation. And I think ultimately he's in a position where the world is quite weak, right? We've come out of Afghanistan. The Americans don't have the stomach for war. Biden definitely doesn't, because ultimately he doesn't want to lose his political vote, and by putting any military troops into Europe, he will lose a political vote.
Well, he has many troops in Europe already. I mean, there's tens of thousands of US troops.
Yeah, there's a big difference between putting troops in Europe and actively going to war with them, right?
Quite.
Ultimately, he needs influence. He will always need influence, no matter where that is in the world. But to basically send people to death, which is ultimately what that is doing, is very influential on the vote. And he can't afford to lose
that's one advantage that Putin has over leaders in the West, is that Vladimir Putin is not dependent on the support of the people. He doesn't require their vote to maintain his grip on power.
Exactly, and ultimately he doesn't care for Russia. He's not. He's very far right. He's all right. He's a Nazi himself, right? He's not pro Russia. He's pro the Kremlin, and that is it. He's out for himself, and he's out for his own personal interests. And ultimately, I think that by seeing the demise of Russia and the demise of the Soviet over his premiership, it's really, really hurt him. And I don't think he can allow that to happen before he comes to an end.
Okay, thanks, Jake. It is an interesting thought that Vladimir Putin is not actually acting in the interests of Russia at all. I mean, he